All right. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you all. This is DFS Army's pre-lock show where you have me. I've won a few GPPs. You have the one and only Razzle, who is a really good GPP player, but is also pretty good at having some big takedowns with just one lineup. Uh, Raz, do you have anything to say about that?
Sometimes it's 94% luck, apparently.
Oh my God. All right. And then we have the one and only writer of winning the $1 million game, also a fantastic GPP player, Burns. Good to have you on the show today, man.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was a little tough last night. I was watching that Bama game,
Ooh.
and so I was like, I don't give a shit about Bama by any stretch,
Okay.
but and family was over, so I didn't get all the edits in that I wanted to. So
Yeah, I didn't know if you were gonna say you're a really big Bama fan because I was like, that's a really disappointing way to start the season.
I'm the OHIO guy.
Yeah, the Ohio State. Yeah.
As you can tell by the jersey on my right behind me, my Dwayne Haskins jersey.
Love it. Awesome. Well, everyone, we're basically here to answer your questions, give you advice. Ideally, if you could tell us what site you're on, what type of tournament it is. Is it a 3-max? Is it a single entry? Is it a large field GPP? Because that stuff matters when we talk about making lineups. We'll also just kind of go over some general aspects of what we're doing on this slate as well. But right away, first comment is likely is good chalk that we need to eat. Last night, we were all not shocked, but definitely shifted some things when we got the news that Mark Andrews is not going to be playing today. Guys, how did that affect what you're doing on this slate? Raz,
It's simplified the tight end position for me, anyways. Like I was gonna go cheap as it was, so I wasn't gonna play a ton of Andrews. Obviously, I always play Andrews with Jackson, but it's just gonna allow me to spend up at wide receivers quite a bit today.
Yeah, okay. What about you, Burns? You doing anything different there, or are you sticking with Likely?
Likely is the guy. It was either going to be him or Hurst, once the news came out. So the way that Likely plays in this offense, the last few games that we got to see him when he was in the offense, he looked pretty good last year. Yep. So, I was really high on Andrews in this game. So it's pivoting to Likely as a likely possibility for me, which is going to happen probably about 50% of my lineups, if not more.
That's exactly what I have. I have Likely in around 50%, and then I'm pivoting in some other spots, trying to get some of those lower owned tight ends, just because that's one of the easiest ways to get different on this slate. But Likely's the guy here. Brian, to answer your question, it's Likely for me. I do like Higbee. I liked Higbee a lot more before Likely was the really good go-to guy. Good to see everyone. Thanks for joining us, guys. I see a lot of the comments in here. Let's see. Ash said Beckham Jr. shirt out the frame if he wins you $1 million today, Burns. Are you playing any Beckham today, Burns?
Give me one. Doubtful. But if I do take down the Millie, I will be. Let's see. I will give away something out of my memorabilia this week. I will be buying every single jersey of every player in that lineup, and they'll be plastered all over the walls behind me. But yeah, for me, Odell Beckham could have a game in this one. Now that we have Andrews out, Odell's that shiny new toy in this lineup or this offense. So, if he makes your lineups just, organically with the DS, allow it to happen. Don't disallow it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that situation too. Andrews getting out really kind of made things interesting when it comes to Lamar Jackson stacks. Primarily, I have a lot of Likely. I have a little bit of Flowers, even a little bit of Bateman and Beckham Jr. too. So like you said, Burns, not trying to force anything, but when it happens, just allow it. What about you, Raz? Any exposure to the Ravens offense this week?
Quite a bit of Lamar, and then obviously Likely. I'm not using Odell much. I think I forced him into one or two Lamar builds, but aside from that, I don't think I have anything outside of the stat combination, just because, I mean, Odell's washed, isn't he? I mean, the all the injuries, I just don't know that he's going to be that explosive.
Yeah.
I like Zay Flowers a lot more, so I'm
agreed.
I'm going to avoid just playing the name, really.
Yeah, that is what it is. I agree. All right, Mr. Andy, DraftKings, Millie Maker, Higbee or Everett? Interesting. Burns, I'll start with you again. What are your thoughts? Any interest in Everett or Higbee this week?
Oh, geez. I would actually be gravitating more towards Everett than Higbee. I like my favorites on the tight end situations. So unless it's a beast matchup where a guy could go off, but even Higbee in this lineup, he didn't get a lot of run last year. So I'm actually going to be really focused on how these guys get runs in their first game on an offensive scheme perspective within the offense. But I do like Everett in this matchup that he's in more than I like Higbee, but it's like, splitting hairs basically.
Yeah, for me right now, looking at my lines, there's literally a 1% difference between how much ownership I have between them. Raz, any interest in these two guys for you?
Yeah, I mean, Higbee falls number 2 and Everett falls number 3 on my list, obviously behind Likely. So, like, they're very similar. I just always use tight ends against Seattle anyways. And without Cooper Kupp, I feel like Higbee just might be the reliant one for Stafford, because otherwise he's got to rely on Atwell and Nakua and Van Jefferson as a number 1. I don't know. With Everett, there's just more mouths to feed, I guess.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're going to throw it more. So, that's the trade-off. But yeah, they're really close for me as well.
Yeah, agreed. All right, next up we have Lamar Likely or Burrow Chase FanDuel GPP. Raz, I'll pass this one to you. Just for those of you that don't know, and it's probably good to talk about. I know we're getting a lot of questions in, but Raz, if you could answer the question, then also just kind of talk about what type of tournaments you usually play and on what site you prefer, things of that sort. Totally fine if it's both, but just curious for people who might not know.
Yeah, for that one, I'm going to go with the Burrow Chase combination just because, we obviously know how high owned Likely is going to be anyways. So give me the lower owned combination. I play GPPs on both. Primarily a DK player. Like I'll probably play 2-1 action wise DK to FanDuel. Large field for me. I'm not really a small field kind of guy.
Okay. What about you, Burns? What are your thoughts? And then also, what are you playing primarily?
Let's see, Lamar Likely. Yeah, both of these stacks have made significant part of my lineups on both sides. I am primarily a DK guy. I rely heavily on statistics and analytics to generate my lineups on a weekly basis. And DraftKings actually is more statistical based than it is with FanDuel. FanDuel, if you can get the touchdowns, you're in the money a lot of the times, whereas in DraftKings, that may not actually happen as much. But, touchdowns are a very lucky based way of scoring. So, to get your idea or your understanding of who's going to score touchdowns on a weekly basis, just look at the props on the TD scorers. You can look at DraftKings or FanDuel, whichever one you want to utilize. But that's more likely than not going to be your best tool to determine who's going to score a touchdown in a given week.
Yeah, and little ad here, but I know the Sharp app has all of the props with like the touchdowns. And you can really utilize the Sharp app to kind of make sure that you're seeing like, hey, who has a really good over when it comes to touchdown projections and things of that sort. And I've seen people have a lot of success with that. So if you're interested, join the Sharp app. I've seen a lot of people have success with that, especially when it comes to FanDuel. But for me personally, I'm more of a DK guy too. I like to think I'm a little bit of a nice mix of looking at the stats and data and then also looking into like watching football and the narratives and things of that sort. So nice balance there.
But I do have a question to you guys on this likely situation. Are you capping his exposure in any which way, or are you just allowing it to like put as many of them in your lineups as possible?
Yeah, for me, it's at 50. That's where I capped him. What about you, Raz?
I actually capped him at 40%. which I think, I mean, overall, it might be 40 to 45%, just because I think in my stacks with Lamar, I capped him at like 60. You know, so I just knew he was gonna get shoved in no matter who my quarterback was. So I don't know. I feel like 40% probably isn't high enough, but I do want to be a little different. But I don't know. It's tough week one, especially at a position like tight end, where I generally don't care all that much about tight ends anymore.
Sure. What about you, Burns? What are you doing there?
Man, I'm telling you, if I let it organically happen, it's going to be like 75% of this guy in my lineups, and it's just a little scary because you know you don't know in week one what's going to actually happen. So having that much is a little scary, but you know, scary money wins money.
Yeah.
You know?
It's that's week one in a nutshell. Like it's one of those weeks where you can make some educated guesses a little bit more than you might be able to a little bit further in the season when projections are a little bit more spot on. Let's see. Reese said, with Bateman's ownership so low, is that someone who you would stack with Lamar and big GPPs? Yeah, I think that's totally fine. Again, like wouldn't force it, but like I'm totally fine with it. Star said, thoughts on running back Deion Jackson, DK 20 max. Raz, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Deion Jackson this week?
I'm a big Deion Jackson fan.
Okay.
I just like, I mean, here's my thing. Like, Zach Moss broke his forearm, right? So, like, how is he going to come back and play? Evan Hall, like, was not much even in college. Like, so we saw Jackson step in last year at different times and perform decently well. So, like, for me, he's just going to get all the touches out of the backfield. At least I believe. But obviously, Richardson, we don't really know.
Yeah.
Rookie
like,
quarterback wise with a running back is
this
tough,
is really one of those situations that you kind of want to see for yourself. Like, I want to see, hey, can Richardson do the short throw to the running back, or is he going to try to run it in a lot more? Curious to see what he does there. Burns, what are your thoughts though?
At 4,100 on DraftKings, it's such a difficult way to get away from him. You have to have him in your pool so that you can offset some of these different running backs and wide receivers at the 7K range. But yeah, he has to be a part of your player pool. I would not be Xing this guy out.
Yeah, I have exposure to him. I am below the field though. It's kind of how I'm treating it.
But in 20 max, if he's above 35-40%, I would lower your exposure a little bit because you need some more exposure to other running backs on the slate as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right. Jay said, who's the top single entry quarterback? That's funny. We were talking about that before we started the show. Just talking about where we want to go from a QB situation. And to be honest with you, Jay, it's tough. Like, this is a week where, like we said, it's week one. There's a lot of things we need to see for ourselves, see how some of these offenses act with new offensive coordinators. There's a lot of moving pieces here. For me, I don't think it's that special, but I like Justin Herbert a lot in this spot. Raz, or I'll go to Burns this time. Burns, where are you going here?
That's the big debate. I got 3 that I'm actually looking at. And I'm playing high dollar single entry contest, 100 and above, 75 and above. So on DraftKings. So, oh man, this one I'm gravitating towards Hurts as being my guy this week, but it's a debate between him and Herbert in a high over-under game. But I'm also interested in that second highest over-under game with Deshaun Watson as being a single entry guy for me. So I've been debating it. Actually, to tell you the truth, in the King of the Beach contests, Deshaun Watson will make he'll make a lineup for me in one of them, in multiple of them, actually.
Okay, yeah, and I'm right there with you. I think for me, well, I have like a few quarterbacks that I'm looking at. Like, it's Herbert, Watson, and Hurts are kind of like the main 3 that I'm thinking about. But then I also have some lines with like Burrow in there as well. But what about you, Raz? Like, who's your single entry guy this week?
I mean, I have it down to 3 as well. We're unanimous on Herbert and Watson. My third guy that I really want heavy exposure to in my MME, so he's in my single entry pool, would be Trevor Lawrence.
Okay.
Being on the road, I think, is why I like Lawrence more. You know, if they were at home, I could probably see more of a blowout and then, you know, shutting it down second half type thing. But being on the road, I think he has a chance to throw quite a bit more. And I'm just overly high on Trevor Lawrence in general this season.
Yeah, I like him a lot this season too, and I think a lot of people are starting to get on the Ridley train. I know we were early on it on Friday's show, but I ultimately ended up getting a little away from Trevor Lawrence this week, but hopefully it doesn't burn me too much. David asked a good, just kind of like general GPP question for DraftKings. This week, is it better to play running back in the flex or wide receiver for DK GPPs? Raz, what's your philosophy here?
I mean, I prefer wide receiver either way. I guess I never really looked back in years past to look at week 1 performances and if they're more running back heavy or, you know, or not. And obviously things have changed coming into this year, right? Less preseason games, etc. So it's kind of tough to gauge how they're going to do it. I'm still just playing it like a normal week of the season and relying on wide receiver mostly in the flex on DK.
What about you, Burns? What do you think?
For me, it's wide receiver in the flex. And this is pretty much how I set up my flex positions in the domination station. It's 30% running back, 0 tight end, and then I pretty much it'll just float to a 70% for the wide receivers. But I just have it as 100%, but it's a floater. So that's how I run. And then FanDuel, it's the complete opposite. Running back is the primary in the flex, and wide receiver is the secondary with 0 of tight ends for me.
Yep, I'm the exact same way there, so nothing new for me. Ricardo has a question for you, Burns. He set his max global exposure to 35% for DK. He wondered, should he change that to account for some of the new value plays?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, with week 1, you could probably go a little higher than that. I mean, you could go up to 45, 50% as a global max and be completely good because it'll allow you to get more of a spread across all the positions. Week 1 is always the weirdest week because we just don't know. Week 2 is a little weird, and then week 3 is less weird. But from week 4 on, it gets where that 35% global max is going to be perfectly acceptable for the rest of this NFL season. But the first 3 weeks, you want to kind of have a graduation of, you know, maybe set it at 50% and then go down from a little bit from there.
Yeah. I feel like these first few weeks are always like the Wild West. We're just trying to survive out here and hope we can strike some gold. But then once you get a little bit closer to like week 4, you have your process down. You just know what you do, and it's just like easy peasy. Someone called you out for the nice camera, Raz. Very true. Diego said, is there any love for Hayden Hurst on DK? Yeah, I have a decent amount of exposure to Hayden Hurst this week, Diego. He's my second tight end on the slate. You know, with DJ Chark being out, rookie quarterback, I think there's a lot of things that could make sense here, but I also think that game's probably going to be a bit of a, you know, just not a great game environment from a fantasy standpoint. So for me, he's like my second highest owned tight end, but I have exposure to a lot of guys this week outside of likely 2. What do you think, Raz? Do you like Hurst on DK?
I don't mind him. I lowered my percentages because obviously I'm Likely and then Higbee and then Everett ahead of him. So I didn't really go wide at tight end. You know, I wanted to focus more on the other positions. So yeah, smaller pool at tight end for me, but I don't mind Hurst. He's just not a priority in any way.
Awesome. Agreed. And Burns, what about you? Any love for Hurst, or are you down on him now too?
If he makes it into my lineups just by you know, the DS working him in, so be it. I really don't have any love one way or the other. But he is in a decent spot this week, and he does have a rookie quarterback, and they can tend to look at the tight ends a little bit more in their first game on the NFL field. So
awesome. Jeremiah, appreciate the $2 tip. Appreciate that, man. What's the game stack you will be targeting this week? Burns, I'll start with you. Do you have any game stack situations you're trying to force?
Yeah, I'm going off the reservation here a little bit. I know everybody's going to be on the Chargers Miami game as a game stack situation here. I'm actually pivoting to another 425 game today, and it's the Seahawks versus the Los Angeles Rams. This one could shoot out. It did last year in week 13. So that would be where my game stacks are.
Okay. And just curious, I'm assuming you're probably quarterback being Geno. Like, who are you bringing it back with, like on the Rams side of things?
So I'll have Geno, and then obviously, and then bringing it back with Akers and potentially Higbee. So, I'm not really high on the wide receivers. I know there's been some love for Van Jefferson. I'm not high on it.
Yeah, I know Geek was really high on Van earlier this week. And I think for me, when it comes to game stacks, I do have like a Tua at QB game stack situation in that game that's pretty popular. And then I'm also doing it with Watson this week with the Bengals game. What about you, Raz? Any game stack situations you like this week?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious is the Chargers, Dolphins, and then Cincinnati and Cleveland. But I'm actually going a little bit to the Minnesota-Tampa Bay game. I just think there's clear spots within that game that makes game stacking pretty easy to do. So maybe call me a Viking fan homer or whatever, but I'm going to go to Cousins week 1. And I mean, Tampa Bay's so easy to bring it back, right? Like you just pick one of the 2 wide receivers or even Rachaad White. I know Geek is huge on Rachaad White this week. So, that one just makes a lot of sense to me.
Agreed. Awesome. 5 cents asks, what's the difference between cash lines and GPP lines? Raz, you want to take this one?
Cash lines are nothing that I build ever. I'm just not a cash player. So like, my mind doesn't think safely, right? Like cash wise, you're looking for guaranteed touches, so DK cash, you're probably ending up with a pass catching running back in the flex a lot of times too. You're just, like guaranteed targets, guaranteed routes, all that thing. GPP, we're not really looking at the guaranteed. We're just looking at the possibility of, downfield and red zone stuff and all that. So they're very similar, but you concentrate on a different set of statistics or, analytics.
Burns, do you play any cash games?
I usually do early in the season, but I'm like Raz. I'm a heavy GPP guy. The best way to approach your cash games, just take the chalkboard on DFS Army's website. Look at the top 2 guys per each position, and then from there on your wide receivers, look at the top 5 to get a holistic scheme of how to develop a cash game lineup. And then also look at the fantasy points per dollar on the domination station to give you your holistic viewpoint of how the cash game could come together. Obviously, some of those guys that are high up in terms of salary aren't all going to be able to fit in the same lineup. So you have to, work your way down per position. So that's basically how you should approach it each week.
Yeah, great words of wisdom. I'm also not a cash guy, so wrong person to ask here. Matt said Trevor Lawrence with Kirk in GPPs. Funny how that also shifted a good bit since Friday's show. At first, we had Kirk getting a lot of the ownership and Ridley being the sneaky GPP guy. Now Ridley's getting a lot of the ownership, and now we have to ask the question: is Trevor Lawrence with Kirk kind of the better combination here? I'm not playing a lot of Trevor Lawrence this week, but I do have some interest in Kirk as a pivot off of Ridley. But Raz, I know you mentioned Lawrence. What are your thoughts on him?
I mean, I'm heavy on both the receivers and even Engram too. But with all the hype with Ridley, like I can understand going to Kirk. I haven't looked at any ownership projections. I just know that the DFS Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it now just fell in love with Calvin Ridley as soon as they saw video of him at like the first practice. So he's getting all the hype, and I think people just forget about what Christian Kirk did with Trevor Lawrence last year. So I think I'm even between the two. I may be between like 5 to 7% different, but when I'm doing 500 lineups between the two sites, 5 to 7% isn't all that big of a difference for me.
Yeah. And then I saw someone ask this question in the chat, and it's fine if we don't know live. I can ask Geek and find out. But do you all know how to get to the DFS Army Discord from the website?
Give me a minute.
Matthew, we do have a Discord, and you can definitely get exposure to it. I'll make sure we find out that answer for you by the time the show ends, which we'll be stopping at 12:30 for those of you who are interested. All right. How many different QBs would you have in your pool for 20 max? I would say for me personally, I used to 20 max a lot. Ideally, I would be between 2 to 3. Ideally 2. On a week like this, I know it's a little tougher, so I'd probably be a little bit closer to 3. Burns, do you 20 max at all, or have you in the past?
I have in the past, and I'm a little different than a lot of people. I don't take a lot of stands at quarterback position. I actually like to spread it out a lot. So with that, generally at a 20 max, early on in the season like this, I'd have upwards of like 6 guys. Best way to break it down, just if you can't break it down from like 10 down to 6, just utilize your favorites. And then once you get that, then if you can't seem to do it that much more, any quarterbacks that are in low over-under games, like 42 and below, X amount of your player pool entirely. I know Geek's pretty heavy on Fields, but the over-under is really starting to get me uneasy on that game. But it's just something that you have to weigh out each week on the types of guys that are there, the types of matchups. So I'm usually about 6 or 7 on a 20 max slate if I do run that.
Oh, okay, I see. Awesome. Ricardo said, okay to stack Burrow with Mixon. Yes, that's totally fine. When it comes to Burrow, he does use Mixon in the pass game. Fish said 54% Godwin, too much. Razzle, what do you think?
I think it might be a little too much, but I'm pretty heavy Godwin too. I think I set global max around 40% on guys this weekend, so I'm pretty sure I'm very close to my max on Godwin.
Okay. I'll pass this one to you, Burns. It said, hey, fellas, who's the best non-Commanders defense? The Dom was spitting out Commanders like it was free candy on Halloween.
It's going to spit it out on DraftKings like it is Halloween candy because they're 2.8K today. Be careful here. When you see a defense that is highly owned across the entire industry, it should give you pause on how much you actually want of them, especially in GPPs. Now, load up on them in cash, load up on them in single entry contests that are high dollar. That's a guarantee. But when you look at large field GPPs like your Millie Makers, you got to get different. 1-to-1 is Green Bay Packers this week. That's a great 1-to-1. Just slightly below, you can look at the Rams. Above them, I would definitely be looking at the Jags. I would be looking at New Orleans. I'd be looking at Baltimore, as well as one of the top defenses that I like this week is the Atlanta Falcons. They're at home. They got rookie quarterback coming in. Things are not as they seem with the Carolina offense right now. They got some injuries coming into play, but I could see Atlanta having a decent day. Now, we can't predict interceptions for scores or anything like that, but they could put themselves in a position to do some damage today.
Yeah. That's painful to hear as a Panthers fan, but I hear you. I do. Not the FBI said, I also noticed that no more than one min price guy was in the Millie winner. Does Hurst at tight end count towards that? Yeah. If that's the philosophy you're running with, then yeah, he counts. Fred asked, how do you set global max exposure? You go here and you change it to whatever you would like it to be. I'm using I don't always use Explorer or Edge or whatever it's called now, but this is my dummy domination station. Jason said, Bob, curious your thoughts on Mingo and what to expect. I haven't followed him at all. He had a lot of drops during the preseason, so that's not great. But I don't really care that much about the preseason, to be honest with you. I just think Mingo's an interesting play with guys like Chark out, but he's not a must play. On Friday, I had a like on him. I took that like off in the domination station, and so now I have like 5 to 10% exposure to him, and I'm hoping that he's just more involved in the offense. But he's not someone I have a ton of exposure to. Yes, Christian Watson is out. Darth Pasta asks, would you consider lowering global ownership a bit along the same lines as raising global player max for this first week? I don't use the global ownership. Raz, Burns, do you guys?
I do when it's like week 4 and beyond. But when you look at the first 3 weeks, you have to have some leeway there. So typically I'm about 130 on that, with a 35% global max. But these first couple of weeks, I got to fluctuate that. So,
yeah. And for those of you that don't know, we're talking about DFS Army's domination station. Feel free to go to the website or click the link in the description. Totally up to you all. But we have a lot of really good tools here. Geek did a late night how to use the domination station video last night where he kind of went over a lot of this. So definitely recommend checking that out with some of the extra time. Let's see. Devontae Smith or Calvin Ridley, FanDuel large GPP. Raz, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm going to lean Ridley just because obviously I announced how much I like Jacksonville. I guess I'm not as high on Philadelphia going into New England this weekend as a lot of people, just because, I think there's some wetness going on there. So I'm just not, I don't know. There's plenty of spots that I like, and that's probably why I pushed Philadelphia down, just because of, slight weather is enough to push me elsewhere. So I'm going to go with Ridley.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Burns?
When I was looking at Ridley this morning, and I was looking at his touchdown prop, and he has a pretty good touchdown prop in terms of, I think it was about plus 120, 115 in and around there, maybe even plus 110 at the time. And he had one of the best touchdown props of any wide receiver on the entire slate. So looking at that, and then I saw Devontae Smith. He was the reason why I lowered my ownership on him, even in Hurt stacks, is because of AJ Brown was actually higher on a prop in terms of getting a touchdown. So Devontae Smith over Ridley? No, I would actually go Ridley over Devontae Smith.
Awesome. All right. OS, thoughts on Aaron Jones? No Watson? Agreed. Like, that's my thought process, OS. Like, that's why I like Aaron Jones a good bit this week. The vulture of touchdowns and also the game environment not really setting itself up for there being a ton of touchdowns is a concern of mine, but I do like Aaron Jones this week. Burns, do you have any love for Aaron Jones, or are you on him at all?
Yeah, Aaron Jones is a good spot. We talked about it on Kevin and I talked about it on Thursday, probably graduated it into Friday's discussion on the tournament tactics. Yep. Aaron Jones is in a good spot here. Chicago in 2022 wasn't very good against pass catching running backs. So, do that with what you want, but he's probably the one go-to guy here for Love. Love can actually throw to him on the flat. He can get significant amount of points on DraftKings because of that with the point perception. So, load him up.
What about you, Raz? Any interest in Aaron Jones?
Yeah, I think he's one of my highest owned in my runs. He or AJ Dillon last year, I mean, each one in one game against Chicago went for between 20 and 30 DK points. So, like, the Packers just attacked the Bears last year with the running backs.
Yeah.
And I just expect Jones to touch the ball more than AJ Dillon. So that's why I'm higher on Jones. But, I do have a few shares of Dillon just because he could also end up with 3 touchdowns because of,
Yeah, no, I think
because
that makes
of football, right?
Yeah, total sense. Mr. Andy said JJ is going to feast. Will Addison at least snack? I like that. Razzle, what do you think? I know you're the Vikings expert here.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect him to. But I also kind of expect there's a possibility that Osborne has a solid game too, right? Like, he stepped up last year, and I know Addison's the new shiny toy to go alongside of Jefferson, but obviously there's Hawkinson too, so there's plenty of mouths to feed. But I would expect Addison to get, I mean, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 targets for sure. And then you can obviously go up if they're trying to take Jefferson away, and if Hawkinson's not 100%. Yeah, because I don't think he played a snap during the preseason, right? So,
yeah,
so there's upside, especially if they try to blanket Jefferson and have to leave everybody else one-on-one. Then I think Addison could surprise.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. What about you, Burns? Any interest in Addison this week?
Yeah, Addison, he could be a game changer in this game, just what Raz said. JJ's going to feast. That's just a given. He's going to be the heaviest targeted wide receiver in the game, probably. They're going to try to force it to him. But, Addison may see some coverage that isn't as, stout. So I would say if he fills in your player pool, I wouldn't be talking you off of it.
Okay. Next up, we have Dobbins or Williams or at running back on FanDuel. Burns, what are your thoughts here?
Okay, this one I kind of toyed with back and forth. This is a tough one in terms of, who you really want. They're really close in salary. One, Dobbins is 6,500, Williams is 6,800. I actually would have to go with ownership projections here, and I believe that at the current point in time, Dobbins is lower than Williams. So I would go Dobbins here, and actually, he was almost core for me on FanDuel. So,
okay, all right. What about you, Raz? Any interest between the two?
I mean, I prefer Dobbins, but I guess off the top of my head, I didn't know which Williams that was because obviously we have Javonte and Jamal Williams. And I'm high on all three of them, but I think Dobbins has a chance to finally be the guy that, was expected coming out of Ohio State, I guess. And we get him healthy to begin the season. So I'm just kind of thinking there's a big game coming from him. And obviously a blowout might help that scenario as well.
That's fair.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Gino, good to see you, man. Said Richardson as a FanDuel QB play. We haven't talked about Richardson yet on this slate. Do y'all have any interest in the prospect? Burns, you're saying no. Raz, what do you think?
He did make my list of quarterbacks. I played 12 quarterbacks today. He's the lowest owned of my 12. But I don't. Rushing ability is a thing, so I actually decided to go with him over, Fields in that scenario. And obviously I like that Jacksonville game as it is, so that kind of made it easier for me to end up on Richardson as well.
I had some exposure, or I had Richardson in my player pool, but then once I created rules and stacking rules and things of that sort, he just stopped showing up, and I was totally fine with that. So I hope it stays that way. Let's see. Tyler asked, in a 20-person full slate DK year-long league, thoughts on week 1 lineup? Herbert, Dobbins, Williams, Mims. Yeah, I think it looks solid. I know Noah Gray already played. You all have any concerns around it?
No, looks good.
Yeah. No,
looks
good to me.
Michael asked, do you always use 100% of your salary or have 100 to 200 left on occasion? Razzle, what's your thought process behind this?
I mean, I don't always use exact salary. I would guess the majority of my lineups end up to $500 or $600 left over. Just because not as extreme as baseball wise, since like I stack hardcore baseball and I don't care if I leave 3,000 on the table, because the stacking is most important. We still have stacks here, so that still takes precedence in my builds. And if we're on an offense or a game that doesn't have super high price wide receivers, it's hard to force it to just make it spend the salary.
What about you, Burns? Any thoughts around this?
Michael, I would just let it organically happen in the domination station. I wouldn't have anything that sets it as, use 100% or use $100 less or $200 less. In certain sports on the domination station, it pays to actually have significant amount of salary left over. MMA comes to mind. Even in showdowns, that comes to mind as well. So, but on main slates in the NFL, spend it all if you can.
Yeah, that was a much better way of saying. The first thing that came to my mind was like, I don't think about it at all. But you said it in such a much better way of just use the domination station and make it happen naturally. Love it. Fred said, what's a good projected ownership cap to set for total ownership? We talked about that already, so no worries there. Football said top chalk we should eat, chalk we should fade. Very general question. Unless you all have any strong opinions around it, I'll pass for now. But do y'all have any general opinions around top chalk you like this week or that you would fade?
I could say a good chalk piece that you could eat and eat heavily is Tyreek Hill this week. He's in a very good spot. Chalk that you could fade on the defensive front, Washington Commanders.
Yeah.
If you're playing like a high dollar single entry, eat that chalk on the Commanders. But if you're playing in large field GPPs, obviously you want to have them in your player pool, but you want to have them at a lower exposure rate.
Yeah, and I'll pass this one to you, Raz. If you have to choose one QB on DK, Geno or Watson, who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Watson. To me, it just feels like a better chance of shooting out in that game.
Watson is supposed to be our sneaky QB this week, Raz. We can't keep talking about him.
I mean,
you're supposed to say no, I'm kidding.
I just have a hard time thinking that the Rams are going to explode offensively right now. So I'll go with the quarterback in the game that I think, both teams could score 4 touchdowns and I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
I feel like I'd be shocked if the Rams score 4 touchdowns, to be honest.
That's fair. What about you, Burns? Any preference between Geno and Watson?
I actually like Watson this week a good bit. I've even been toying with him as a single entry quarterback. So if that, but I do like Geno in GPPs where you can multi-enter. So
awesome. All right. And then Justin said, would you play a Ritter stake on FanDuel or stack of Ritter, London, and Robinson? I don't play FanDuel, but what are y'all's thoughts around this kind of stack?
I mean, I don't know that Ritter would be somebody I want to double stack with. Especially with the running back. If I was double stacking, I guess I would go with London and Pitts, but I think a majority of Ritter's value might be some rushing. The fact that Atlanta runs the ball a ton inside the red zone, and they have for years. That was a huge issue with even when they had Julio. He just wasn't catching touchdowns in the red zone because they rely a lot of running backs and that sort of thing. So I don't know that Ritter's a guy that supports a double stack, I guess. Upside wise.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how the Falcons play today, just because I'm interested in seeing what other running backs they use, how often are they going to use Robinson. There's a lot of interesting ways they can do it. And also, because of the backup running back options they have, I don't even know if they would use Robinson in the past. So that's I would pass on it. But I'm not playing Ritter, but if you do like the Ritter stack, I do like London a good bit this week. What do you think about this one here, Burns?
I think the over-under is too low for me to be remotely on Ritter at all this week. Yep. Typically, we want over-unders that are 45 and greater. Or if we don't get that on a slate, we want something in and around about 43.5 and higher. I just don't like this game from a over-under perspective to be on the quarterbacks in this game. Now on FanDuel, I do like Bijan Robinson. He does have some really nice potential there to get some good points on FanDuel. Drake London, I do like Drake London on DraftKings. And I have some of him on FanDuel as well. But to stack them, I'm not on board with that.
Yeah, a little bit tougher. OS said Godwin and Seattle defense or Evans and Atlanta defense, FanDuel GPP. Burns, I'll pass this one to you. What do you think about this one?
Oh, geez, this one is tough. Godwin's going to be higher owned than Evans. So on a game theory perspective, I would lean Evans on the wide receiver. On a game theory perspective, I'd probably look at either one of those defenses because they're really close in salary. I think they're $100 difference on both sides, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 300 max difference. But either way, I'd probably lean on Evans with the wide receiver, and then whoever is lower ownership projection on the defense because they're both in good spots.
Awesome. All right. Dave said Jamar Chase or Tyreek Hill on DK. I love them both, but I have more Hill than I do Chase. Raz, what are your thoughts on this? Jamar Chase or Hill?
I mean, I have more Hill as well, but that automatically makes me think that maybe I'm too underweight on Jamar Chase. If because all three of us like Hill, because Burns mentioned it before about the good chalk to eat being Tyreek Hill. So I assume Tyreek Hill is his choice of these two as well. So like that automatically makes me think maybe I need to consider Chase over Hill a little bit more to be different.
Yeah, I have Tua stacks though, so it just happens by itself. Right. It has to happen. Jay said, who would you stack Watson with in single entry? Burns, Njoku, and Cooper, or just one? What do you think here, Burns?
I'm stacking Watson probably with just Njoku in single entry if I go that route. So I can have some savings there. I believe the savings is significant. It's like 2,500 savings to go to Njoku. Njoku is a beast down and around the red zone. So if you want to go single entry with Watson, I would go with Njoku. It would help you to offset some of the salary needed to go scale up on your wide receivers, and you could even get a Jamar Chase in there as a bring back. So
yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Benton, with Thielen playing, thoughts on Mingo now? Yeah, I mean, I mentioned in the domination station, there's a setting where you can put adore, etc., to get more exposure to players and change their projection. Once I found out Thielen was playing, I changed it to neutral. So I have exposure to Mingo naturally, but I'm not forcing it or changing it by any means. I Need Money said, is ETN stackable of Trevor Lawrence? Raz, what are your thoughts on this?
I think he is, but I don't have very much. I'm just mostly focusing on the wide receivers, tight end. There's just enough guys in the passing game that I just don't think ETN is going to be used a ton. I obviously could be wrong, but there's a lot of love for Bigsby as well coming out of the preseason, which is kind of weird, but I don't know. Like I like ETN, but I kind of want to see how they're going to deploy their running back combination now.
What's up, B-Dubs? Haven't heard much on Johnston. What are y'all's takes on him and Herbert stacks? Burns, what are you thinking here?
Considering that Josh Palmer is starting over him in this game, I'm probably not going to have anything until I see how they actually operate on the offensive side with him. Does that mean that he's not going to be in the game? No, that means he'll probably be in the game. But how much, how many snaps is he going to be in the game, and how much of a target share is he going to see? That's the toughest question right now from that Chargers offense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For me and my stacks with Herbert, I have Eckler, Williams, Allen, Everett, and a little bit of that backup tight end. So that's pretty much where I'm at there. Mr. Andy, do game times play a factor when building lineups? Majority of lineups have 12 p.m. game times, but try to make sure I have a couple late game players for me. No, not at all. Burns, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, you can do studies on this, and I've tried to do them in the past, but in all honesty, there's really no significance.
Do you have any philosophy around this, though, Raz?
As far as how I do things, no. I just think organically I end up with players in the afternoon games because I feel like every week there's one afternoon game that just has, massive totals.
Yeah.
So we're just automatically getting guys from that game as it is.
Mhm.
So I guess I've just never put priority on one time slot or another.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Any interest in Komet? Raz, do you have any interest? For me personally, no. I don't have any, but I think if I was playing Justin Fields, I'll be fine with him. But do you have
Yeah,
any
I mean,
interest
if you have Fields, then yes, I would, but I'm not using much Bears offense today at all, really. I mean, I'm sure I have a random share of like DJ Moore or something, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Komet just disappeared a lot in games last
Mhm.
year, and then all of a sudden he'd explode, and then there'd be nothing. So until I can see that Fields can routinely complete passes, I think going forward, I'm just going to end up using Fields
Yeah,
naked a
that's fair.
lot.
Mark said favorite men's salary player. I feel like it's cheating. I think it's going to be likely for everybody. But Burns, Raz, do y'all have a favorite men's salary player? That's not likely, maybe.
I think you can actually go. I'll save one for. I'll go Jalen Reed on Green Bay
Yeah.
Packers at 3K. I think he's got the potential with Watson, who is
Mhm.
officially out, and Dobbs, who could be hobbled. We don't know what's the situation with Dobbs right now, so Jalen Reed could eat in this game,
Mhm.
and that would be my guy.
Yeah, I know Geek pulled up the Sharp app last night on his Domination Station setup show, and he was looking at the props on Jalen Reed, and they were pretty impressive. So I agree with that. Raz, anyone for you?
I mean,
It's
it's
fine.
going to be, Marvin Mims is probably the
Yeah.
other one, right? Even though like Sutton's a core play for me on the site, just because I feel like Mims is still going to carry a decent amount of ownership.
Fair.
Maybe not as much now with likely being the
Mhm.
salary saver for sure.
Okay. Burns, I'll pass this one to you. Is it better to avoid defenses with game predictions over 45?
No, not at all. Actually, you could utilize defenses and over-unders that are high. It's actually contrarian to do so.
Nice. Chris, I'll pass this one to you, Raz. Thoughts on Brian Robinson over chalky Jamal Williams versus tough Tennessee run defense?
I mean, I think it's a fine pivot for GPP wise. I just like Jamal Williams because of his touchdown equity, and obviously,
Yeah.
like the Saints are so thin at running back. I think didn't I see something earlier that Kendre Miller is going to be inactive too. So like, there's a lot of opportunity there for Jamal Williams. But yeah, Robinson's probably a solid play just on his own, just because they're expected to win that game pretty easily, right? So
Yeah.
I definitely don't mind it at all.
Yeah. I have more Jamal Williams, but I am above, or I'm right around field weight on Brian Robinson Jr. too. So I agree with that. Do you have any thoughts on Brian Robinson this week, Burns?
He's definitely in my pool, and I probably have about 10-15% of them in my pool right now. But Jamal Williams with Keandre Miller out is a big factor. So I'm in agreement with Raz there. And Chris, you don't actually have to worry so much about your ownership percentages from the running back position, because we want volume from the running back position. And if Jamal Williams is the only guy there, he's going to get the volume. So it's whether or not Tennessee can stop him.
Yeah. All right. Burm asks, what is the recommended projection setting in the DM standard or ceilings for GPPs? I think you mean this. Tournament mode is the one I always use. I'm assuming Burns, Raz, you all also use tournament mode, but is that the case?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. William Flowers, Rashad Penny has been ruled out via Twitter. Awesome. Thanks for the update, man. Yeah, it makes things a little bit easier for the Eagles, right? I know they had a little bit of a messy backfield, right?
Yeah. Still messy.
Yeah, still a lot of guys back there. Cool. All right. I think we're pretty much caught up. Ash is saying, the whiteout on the Rams smashes when Cups is out. All right, I hear you, man. All right, well, I guess we can wrap up. Only about 5 minutes left. Anything you want to leave everyone with? Like any last thoughts on the slate before we kind of head in? Any words of wisdom? Raz, we'll start with you.
I got nothing. I'm just a little too out of it this morning, but just be prepared for random stuff for week one. Like I spread my pool out a lot farther, wider for week one than I do, week 5 of the season. I start to narrow it down quite a bit. So don't be afraid of having, I don't know how many players were in my runs, but a large number of players, and you freak out. I know in baseball, a lot of guys are freaking out because they're getting, 70 different players in their 150 builds or whatever. Just let it be wide to start, and then as we get more information and get better, you can tweak it, and then week 5 you might be cutting it off by 20% of what you end up with this week. So
true. And Brutus, good point. Yeah, so he was talking about like the projection versus ceiling projection, and we do use projection, not ceiling projection. What about you, Burns? Any last thoughts, final thoughts?
As this NFL season gets going, a lot of things are going to start to showcase themselves over the course of the season. This week, it is almost like take a dartboard and throw your dart at a guy, and if it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We just don't have the information that we typically have to make educated choices in terms of lineup. But don't be fearful of any one guy within your lineups. If the domination station gives you, say, like, I don't know, 5% of a guy, whereas nobody else has them, don't be fearing that. Let it happen. Let the domination station work for you organically, and you may see better outcomes in your lineups. And stop tinkering as well, Kevin.
It's like final words of advice calling out Kevin. Yeah, I mean, I think that's similar to my advice. I would just say, I think week 1, a little bit too late to tell you all to be a little bit careful with your money, but be a little bit open to playing some guys that you might not usually play. I know we talked about some guys that could be sneaky on the Friday show, so I'll just kind of leave that because Bobby Wow had those calls, so I'll just let him emphasize those a bit more. But hey, y'all, I appreciate you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Burns won't be with us, but it'll be Razzle and myself, and hopefully we'll have one more guest who can join us. So good luck, make some money. We'll see you all next week. Have a good one. Bye.
Peace.